a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well...
The response is, I got a call from the hospital. I really want to watch this. Can we pause this for 2 seconds? But I really want to see this movie with you.
Yeah.
And even that approach makes a huge difference. Because if I'm texting, oh, hold on. Yeah, just hold on. Just pause the movie. That's not a recipe for success.
We should make a movie about CMOs trying to watch movies because it wouldn't go well. Podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you stories and wisdom from some of the best CMOs in healthcare today. The leaders on this show face some of the toughest challenges in healthcare, and they will share with you their insights about the role and the responsibilities that come with the title of Chief Medical Officer. Today, our guest is Dr. Gil Padula, the Chief Medical Officer and Market Medical Director for Case Management at Bon Secours Mercy Health in Youngstown, Ohio. Dr. Padula grew up in Rochester Hills, a suburb of Detroit, Michigan, and earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan. He went on to earn his medical degree from Michigan State University's College of Human Medicine. And from there, he went to the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where he trained in radiation oncology. Finally, Dr. Padula has also earned a master's in healthcare management from Case Western in Cleveland, Ohio. Gil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
Before we get started, Gil, it turns out we have several things in common. The most notable has to be that we both attended the University of Michigan, right?
We did. Go Blue.
Go Blue. And then we committed the mortal sin of all Big Ten mortal sins, which is actually the only real conference, and we were in it when it was only 10 teams. And we each attended a rival institution to study medicine. You landed among the Spartans in East Lansing at Michigan State, and I landed in Columbus among the Ohio State Buckeyes. Did your fellow medical students give you crap about being Wolverine?
They did. There were a lot of Michigan State alumni in my medical school class, and they still give me crap. And, I look back and reflect, they're two very fine institutions. At my core, I'm a Wolverine. I will always root for the Spartans, but on Michigan State game day, you're not going to take the blue out of me. So I think we were there at a similar time period too, Lee. So
yeah, we were.
Yeah.
Now the difference is you are is it a Michigander? Is that how it is?
They say Michigander now. Yes.
Yeah, Michigander. But I was a Buckeye, and I left the border state of Ohio, crawled to Ann Arbor, got my degree, and crawled back with my tail between my legs to go to Ohio State. So I'm proud of you for supporting the fine institutions in your state. I got a lot of crap when I went through it. But anyway, there's another thing we have in common is our role as oncologists prior to becoming chief medical officers.
Sure.
Of course, I use the liquid agents and you use the laser beams, but we both endeavored to treat some really bad diseases and illnesses. And there are not too many of us with that background who entered into traditional chief medical officer roles. You and I both know Dr. Hoffman, a radiation oncologist. Do you know any other oncologists that have entered into the role of CMO?
Walela Tarefa is the chief physician executive at MD Anderson, and she was 2 classes behind me in residency. Haven't spoken to her in a while. I heard she's doing some great things. And, as you and I have talked about, Lee, I think oncology is a great platform to prepare to become a CMO. Unfortunately, not a lot of us do it. We get stuck in the infusion suite and we get stuck in the basement in radiation oncology, and we forget that we're part of broader and more organized medicine. So one of my personal goals as I guide the next generation is to remind people you can be a great radiation oncologist and still be a medical administrator and serve both constituencies.
That's wonderful advice. And I think we shared this with each other the last time we spoke. One of the great advantages of having become an oncologist and then moving on to the chief medical officer role is it usually takes 6 to 9 months to see a response to our treatment. And sometimes some of the initiatives that we have in our role can take about 6 to 9 months, right?
I share that exactly. Like length of stay, it's like shrinking a tumor, right? And that to move that curve a little bit, it's just like treating cancer. So you and I understand each other very well.
That is classic. All right, the last thing before we get to some of the questions, and I know our listeners are curious about your insights about being a chief medical officer. You and I, we have one thing in common, and that is the Northeast Ohio connection. As I mentioned earlier, I am a Buckeye. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and presently you are in Youngstown, Ohio, correct?
Yeah, the market serves all the way from Lorain to Youngstown. So really the Northeast Ohio market with University Hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, and Metro Health being other big players in the region as well.
So I am serving a lifetime ban from the borders of Boardman Township, which is in the neighborhood of Youngstown, Ohio. A friend of mine and I, Stephen Roth, we paid a very late night call to a young lady's house in Boardman. And this part's a little sketchy still. We were trying to get this girl, Stacy, to come out cruising with us in Steve's car. And this was long before cell phones and texting. And we were making some noise to get her to look out her upstairs bedroom window when her father came out the front door and stated that should either of us ever return to the area after disturbing his family at night, well, let's just say he mentioned the name of his next door neighbor and that friend, his name was Ed DiBartolo. Does that name ring a bell to you?
Oh, it sure does. It's a big name. Yeah.
And what do you know about Mr. DiBartolo?
He's a legend.
Yeah, the largest developer of shopping malls at the time, and any of us who grew up in the area in the 70s and 80s also knew that Ed and his family were being watched very carefully by both the FBI and the Department of Justice for his alleged ties to La Cosa Nostra, otherwise known as the Mafia. So I don't go to Boardman anymore because I don't need that hassle. So anyway, let's speak.
I'll meet you in neutral territory next time.
That's it. All right, so the audience is ready to go here. Let's begin with your journey in becoming a chief medical officer and how you ended up in Northeast Ohio and the whole journey. So give us your origin story, Gil.
Sure. So, when I went to medical school, I never set out to be a physician leader. I just wanted to go to medical school. Always had a background interest in radiation oncology, and my mother was a medical physicist. So I knew about the field. I thought I'd be a family practitioner, and it just wasn't for me. So I looked at radiation oncology, and I liked it because it involved concepts and procedures, doing things with your hands, doing things physically to help patients, but also a lot of deep thinking, a lot of memorization, a lot of intellectualization, a lot of rationalization. So I thought that was really the best way to combine both interests. Historically, surgeons like to do and internists like to think, and I thought radiation oncology was really the best combination of the two. So worked really hard in med school, got into Sloan Kettering for my residency, and I just wanted to be the best oncologist that I could be. And that's the advice I would give anybody wanting to be a physician leader. Number one goal is be good at your job. Be good at being a doctor, be respected at being a doctor, and your trajectory will already start, and you won't even realize that it's starting because people will be noticing. He's really good with patients. She's really good at these projects. She's already, publishing papers. People will know about you, and those juices will start to flow, and the cogs will start to move. So I started private practice in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And, when you train at Sloan Kettering, you do a physical exam, you look at imaging, and you always look to see, does this patient, qualify for a clinical trial? And so I remember being in private practice asking my partners, how do we do RTOG clinical trials here? And the response was, we're about the patient. We're about productivity. We don't waste our time with that. And I'm thinking, well, if you're about the patient, don't you want to offer them clinical trials? So being 30 years old, not knowing really how to navigate politics, I'm like, okay, I'll just start clinical trials. So I called the local administrator. I said, how do we get RTOG clinical trials in Grand Rapids? And she's like, you're going to open up a can of worms. I'm like, well, let's open it. Not thinking, I might ruffle feathers or whatever. And we actually started a RTOG consortium in West Michigan to build clinical trials and offer them locally. So my partners sat me down. I wasn't even a full partner yet, and said, this is your baby. This is your gig. You want to put these patients on study. You do it, but we're going to have no part of it, and it better not affect your productivity. It's like, okay. And it didn't affect my productivity. And then other practices started calling my practice in the region saying, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? Why is he going off the rails? And all I was doing was opening clinical trials. And doctors being competitive, and that's something that I think we can leverage as physicians to grow and have a presence. We're innately competitive people. So rather than try to shut me down, my partners started enrolling patients on clinical trials. And the other groups in Western Michigan started saying, well, if he can do it, why can't I do it? And they started enrolling patients on clinical trials. So a couple years later, I got called to a board meeting of the Grand Rapids Clinical Oncology Program, which is a local consortium that's funded by the National Cancer Institute. And it was in the evening, and the principal investigator and the board wanted to meet with me. I said, okay, this is the beginning of the end. I really pissed off the wrong person. And as we know, these consortia are typically run by medical oncologists. And they sat me down and said, we want you to put your hat in the ring to be the principal investigator of our consortium. And I left thinking, wow, I've been able literally to reach across the aisle. I mean, we tend to be very tribal in oncology, as you know. Rad-oncs stick with rad-oncs and trust rad-oncs. Med-oncs stick with med-oncs and trust med-oncs, and the surgeons are the same. And I said to myself, wow, I was able to accomplish something. They could have picked one of their own. There's 20, 30 of them they could have picked. I'm sure there was a candidate just as qualified, but they decided to reach across and have me put my name in the ring. And I did, and I didn't think I was going to get it. And before I knew it, the election came, and I won, and I was appointed principal investigator of the Grand Rapids Clinical Oncology Program. So that was my first foray into medical leadership. And if I look back, if I reflect on that, I say, what did I do? I was solving problems. I was trying to make things better for doctors and patients, solving a problem where there was a gap, and bringing people along with me, and even bringing people from a different constituency. So we went ahead, we merged with another NCI-funded consortium, and we built an 11 health system cancer research consortium. We got an $11 million grant from the National Cancer Institute, and to this very day, it is one of the strongest, best funded, most productive cancer research consortia in the country. So very proud of that, very proud of the team I worked with there. And so at that point, it was very clear that I was a physician leader. I had established myself as a physician leader, and I liked it. I liked helping patients at the bedside, but I also liked helping other doctors, because when doctors help other doctors do their work better, hundreds of patients get better care. So I picked a mentor at the competing hospital who was a cancer center director, and I said, how will I know that I want to continue on this trajectory? And she goes, when your term is done, you'll either be glad you did it and go back to clinical practice, or you'll miss it. And I missed it. Word got out, and I was recruited to be the cancer center director at Suma Health here in Northeast Ohio. I accepted the role, and we built a research infrastructure. We built some multidisciplinary clinics. And what I learned in that role was it was the first time stepping out of the radiation oncology role. I was helping medical oncologists. I was helping surgeons. I was helping other specialties within the realm of oncology and bringing their work forward. And what really struck me is when I was meeting the service line director of cardiology, the service line director of neuroscience, orthopedics, they were all struggling with the same things. And that was my aha moment. What were we all working on? Building the book of business, improving quality and safety for patients, working on the star rating for the hospital collectively, building the patient experience. And I said to myself, wouldn't it be nice to be able to not just do this for oncology, but do it for orthopedics, do it for surgery, do it for neuro? And I said to myself in that aha moment, I think I want to be a CMO one day. And it just happened naturally, because I said, who does all this for everybody but the CMO? So I got recruited after several years there. The chair of radiation oncology at University Hospitals met me for dinner and said, "What's your career goal?" I said, "I want to be a CMO one day." I was thinking one day could be 10 years, 5 years, 15 years. It was like this one day thing. And he said, "You should come to UH." He said, "We have multiple hospitals. We're a large health system, and I will support you in becoming a CMO."
So Gil, so you're in Akron at SUMA.
Yep.
And for our listeners who don't know the geography, university is up in Cleveland, so about 35-ish miles, give or take, right? So, I mean, hot competitive market that people are reaching out to you in this geography. So I just wanted the listeners to know where we're at. So keep going. So what happened?
Yeah, so hotly competitive market. And I said, well, maybe when something opens up, I'll apply, but I'm fine. I'm happy right now. He said, what if I make you associate chairman of the department? And that was something I never sought out, but being associate chair of a national radiation oncology department is also a feather in your cap. So I got there in the spring of 2020, and literally within 3 weeks of me arriving, a CMO role opened up at one of our community hospitals on the west side of Cleveland, St. John Medical Center. And I knew some people from SUMA that were now at UH. It's all a very small small world.
Right.
And they said, you should apply for it. Again, I applied, didn't think I was going to get it. I was new to UH. Lo and behold, I went through the interview process that I was going to get cut. They had the 2 finalists. And they asked me by the end of that year to be the CMO. Absolutely loved the role. We were able to go from 4 to 5 stars. We did some great work with patient experience, quality.
And there was a pathogen right around that time.
There was a pathogen. And so that was a great way to learn. I'm getting my master's right now, and our instructor in the course said, you learn when you're uncomfortable. So I got in there in the midst of COVID thinking, what have I signed up for? So we're dealing with COVID, all the throughput issues, all the workforce issues, and I'm learning how to be a CMO. And that stress and discomfort led to me growing in that role significantly. And so we did some really good things. Again, happy in the role. And then I was approached by Mercy Health to become CMO at the flagship hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center, several hundred beds, much bigger than where I was before. And I knew I liked being a CMO, but the ultimate way to grow as a CMO would be to take on a market role and be the CMO of a flagship hospital. That's the ultimate test, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am now. So very, very long-winded answer to your question. But to summarize, it evolved naturally. I declared my interest, and here we are.
Did you buy new properties in Akron and Cleveland, or stay in the same neighborhood? How did you manage all that?
I got married in 2022, so I moved into my wife's house on the east side of Cleveland. But there was a condo before that, so not a huge collection of different properties.
Gotcha. Because you and Mr. DiBartolo could have some conversations about real estate. Yeah, of course. Well, what you went through, a lot of us went through in terms of OTJ, on the job training. Prior to some of our colleagues that you and I have gotten to know over the last few years, there was no real guidebook. There was no real handbook. There was no parameter. Now, some of the bigger health systems in the United States, some of the Catholic not-for-profit systems and out west, they have created some internal dialogue to help train their chief medical officers, but the vast majority are like you and I, sort of in a small region and learning how on the fly with mentors and things like that. So how did you prepare for, as you felt the magnetism of moving from, building programmatic leadership for clinical trials and radiation oncology in Grand Rapids, and then a medical director, and then a chair, and you articulated that chief medical officer was a destination for you. But some of it happens because people just give you a call, they tap you on the shoulder, they hear about your good work, which for our listeners is a great way to advance your career. Just do a great job. You said that earlier. and things really progressed from there. But what did you do? Name a couple of things that you did to prepare for these roles as they were growing.
I think what I did is going to CMO conferences, literally calling other well-respected CMOs and saying, what are some things you do? What are some things that you work on? What are your top priorities? And then talking to system leadership, meeting regularly with our health system CEO, learning what his priorities were. Because although there's the typical CMO priorities, he or she might have their own priorities for their CMOs. And if you're not aware of those, you might say quality, safety, patient experience, but they really want you to grow the book of business too. And if you're unaware of that, that's not good for you, right? So kind of learning a really one-on-one, going to the top dog. And a lot of people are nervous about that because if you're at a community hospital, I'm going 2 layers above me to meet with the CEO. Just say, I want to learn. I want to meet with the CEO and I want to be mentored. And I specifically would tell the CEO, I want to grow. I want to have a regional role one day. I might want to be a hospital president. Can I meet with you quarterly and have you mentor me and give me candid feedback, both positive and areas of opportunity? And the answer with these folks is always yes. And then after talking to people, some themes struck. And there's like 4 things that are common with every CMO in the country. Medical staff issues, dealing with disruptive doctors, credentialing. How do you create a cohesive medical staff that can function independently as it should, but still serve the needs of the hospital? That's one big bucket.
Yep.
Another bucket is patient experience. How do you motivate your doctors? Well, I'm a good doctor. I zap that tumor every time. Yeah, but you're perched against the door. You're checking your phone and your patients don't like you. So at that point, the fact that you eradicated their tumor is great, but you just pissed them off those 6 weeks that you were with them. So how do we work with you and help you get to where you need to be? So patient experience is another one of those buckets. And then quality and safety. And this is an area, things like length of stay, hospital-acquired infections, falls, bed sores, things like that are very important. And, that is the challenging part, because when you talk about that stuff with doctors, if it's not couched properly, they will tell you, oh, you're just in with the administration now. You're just trying to make more money to get that bonus at the end of the year. So you have to talk about things like length of stay. How does it benefit you and your patients, right? If you keep a patient in the bed 7 days, I know if I have a flight to Europe, if I'm on the plane for 8 hours, I'm stiff getting out of there. And the first workout after that isn't going too well for me, right? And I'm relatively young and mobile and pretty healthy. So imagine a patient in bed for 7 days when they could have been in bed for 3 days. They're going to get deconditioned. They're at risk for nosocomial infections. They're going to go to a sniff and potentially get even more deconditioned. So, think of the patient and think of how you're helping the patient by really trying to move them along on their trajectory. Think of discharge the very second you make the decision to admit your patient to the hospital. And many physicians will say right off the bat, okay, you're just saying this in a nice way because you want money. But it's really working one-on-one and showing the doctors that their work matters, but their lives, and more importantly, the lives of their patients, can be better for these changes that we do. And an added benefit is things like the star rating, improved revenue for the system, and those are laudable goals. If you're not making money, you can't serve your community, right?
That's excellent. There's a lot of wisdom in what you said, and a key skill in leadership development is having a keen sense of your environment. And you describe meeting the CEO and asking what that person's priorities are. And what I'm picking up in this conversation is first of all, that's brilliant, and people don't know that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a key takeaway for today's show. But the other thing that you suggest is, as you talk to your medical staff about quality, safety, length of stay as an example, you talk in their language, and that there are certain priorities of theirs. And look, to be honest, they're reflecting to you, but your priority, Dr. Padula, is to serve the administration and make your bonus. I mean, it doesn't feel good to hear it, but there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. That is a reality that you live in. But you turn around and go, but your patient should be getting out of bed earlier or sooner or moving towards that discharge. The safety of what we do in this ecosystem that we call the hospital and you begin to speak the physician priority in such a way that at least you guys can level set. Like, so the doctor agrees, yeah, you're an administrator and you have certain responsibilities, but it's at a scale where you're helping the physicians and the patients, and the physicians begin to realize, yeah, we're all trying to help the patient. So you can sort of find a place where you're both in agreement, even if you have different realities. Would you agree with that?
I agree entirely. You can both create a win-win, even though your priorities might be a little bit different along the way.
Yeah. Great stuff. Great stuff. As you look back on the arrival to your role as chief medical officer, and not specific to any of the institutions that you worked at, take a moment, step back, consider this question. If I were to interview your coworkers, what do you think they would say about you? What do you think they've observed about you along the way? And how do you perceive the way they perceive you?
So if I had to guess, they would say Gil is highly enthusiastic. He cares about the medical staff. He makes us a priority. We always don't like what he has to say, but we feel he has our back and we genuinely can work with him.
I think that's awesome. Sometimes part of leadership is saying things that people don't want to hear. And as you know, sometimes that doesn't feel good saying it. No,
it doesn't. And I'll give you a real-time example. A lot of pressure on me tonight. I'm in an intensive MBA class for a week, and it's actually a management class this evening, but I have to report off at MEC. So my MBA colleagues will be watching me report off. It's going to be an abridged report, but I have a pit in my stomach, and I usually don't have, it's not confrontation, but I don't like to deliver good news. But this is something that's very common with CMOs. We have a beautiful medical staff lounge, and our promise to the docs is if you have to dictate over lunch, dictate over dinner, there's food here for you. And I have to have a very difficult conversation during MEC, reporting off on some things in front of my MBA classmates. I have to say, people are taking food out of the medical staff lounge and bringing it home to their families, and I have to have this challenging task to say, if you're dictating, grab a sandwich, grab a bite to eat, but please don't stuff your backpack. And that's just a very uncomfortable conversation. I am sure a medical staff member will be saying, I've been on staff here all these decades and you can't let me take a couple sandwiches home, and we're going to have that discussion. It's going to be painful. So even though you and I are skilled at these discussions, it doesn't eliminate the fact that even the sandwich discussion is something I'm going to be thinking about all day long today.
So that should go on the list that you articulated about things in common that chief medical officers have to deal with, is sort of the drama of the physician lounge.
Absolutely.
And you are not alone in trying to be the chief of police when it comes to how the food is managed in the lounge. And I bet you almost every CMO has had this conversation.
100%. And our hospital president, had said, look, this is a lot of money we're spending on food. We have all these, and I pushed for the snacks. I said, let's get healthy snacks. Let's get some meat. Let's get some cheeses. Let's get salads. Let's get these gourmet sandwiches. And she's like, they can't be taken home to their family, so let's stop it. So I had to put the brakes on the hospital president. Slow down. Let me address this with the medical staff. And so I put the brakes on her, and now I got to deal with the medical staff tonight. It's going to say, I can't take 3 or 4 sandwiches home to my family. So that's the challenge right there, right?
Yeah. I'm going to wish you the best of luck, and
Thank
I'm
you.
going to call you or text you next week to find out how it went, because I don't even want to give you advice going into this right now.
I'm not looking forward to it.
Who in particular was influential to you in preparing yourself to become a chief medical officer, or at any part of the trajectory that you described? Role models or mentors, who was influential for you?
If I think back at my time at SUMA, the chief medical officer, Dr. Vivian von Gruningen, was really somebody that I would consider a mentor. She was really good at her role. She was probably tougher than I am in my role, but she was very effective. And I said to myself, I'd like to be like her one day. And then when I got to UH, my boss there, Dr. Kim Trickett, who was the regional/systems CMO, was also a very good mentor and boss. And I think I've been blessed with that as well here with Dr. Kravik. So just having the right people above you to guide you and be willing to say, nobody really likes to give feedback. It's a very painful thing to do. Be willing to say, please give me candid feedback. I want to hear the good, the bad, the areas of opportunity, but you have to make yourself vulnerable to do that. But in getting that feedback, you grow. And I went from a 100-bed hospital to, several hundred-bed hospital now, level 1 trauma center with a regional role. So clearly, I listen to that feedback, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one thing to ask for it, which takes a bit of courage, and then it's another step to actually incorporate the feedback into your growth and development. So kudos to you for both asking and receiving it and working with it, because not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, I've been watching the Northeast Ohio market for a number of reasons, studying what's going on with Summa Health and Hatco. For our listeners, that this is a brainchild of General Catalyst and their investments in health assurance, and with Mark Harrison from Intermountain, they have entered into an agreement to purchase and ultimately operate Summa, and it will be a fascinating experiment. And at the same time, university is going through some challenges, as many health systems are. So you're in a crazy region, and we'll have to do this again in 6 months to a year and see what's going on in the market there, because I think chief medical officers, as they grow in their scope, as you say, going from 100-bed to several hundred-bed to multiple hospitals, understanding the environment of healthcare in your area is equally important. But we'll come back to that another time.
I agree.
What was the hardest thing that you faced as a chief medical officer, aside from the pandemic of COVID-19?
I think one of the biggest challenges is when you are trying to help a physician and they don't want to get out of their own way. Working, for example, there's a doctor I worked with had, atrocious patient experience scores, but was very busy, was very productive, very beneficial to the hospital financially. So there's always that balance, right? Because, some people will say, well, just get rid of him, send him on his way. He can't relate to the patients. Our scores are suffering. But then there'll be another faction that's tripping in your ear saying, he's very productive and he brings a lot of revenue to the organization. Just leave it be. Well, neither answer is sufficient, right? We want to really push, develop, and grow physicians. And I always say to people, I'm a 4-chance CMO. I give physicians 4 chances, right? But once you've hit that 4th chance, then we're going to have a real serious come to Jesus meeting, right? Well, what does the future look like for you here? And I think the challenge is, we had one doctor in my prior role, very busy, just struggled with patient experience, and would just give some tips, right? I'm a radiation oncologist. I'm not an inpatient doctor. I'm not a surgeon. So food for thought. I can't tell a surgeon how to manage surgical patients. I can't tell an internist how to manage patients on the wards. But, try to sit down on the edge of the bed or a chair and make eye contact with the patient and use nonverbals. Just those things, which we all know, if somebody has bad patient experience scores, they try those things, usually they go right through the roof, right? And he said, yeah, I'll work on it, but I'm really busy. I'll work on it, but I'm really busy. And he never attempted it, right? And it was at a point where I'd even asked the nurses, is he sitting down? Well, he's talking to them from the hallway. Well, of course he's going to have bad patient experience scores. So
right.
Those are some disappointments that stick with you because you went to med school, and I'm giving you very simple advice, very simple concepts. Sit down and make eye contact. Your scores will go from the 30th percentile to the 80th percentile overnight, right? So it's like, why can't you hear me, right? Because you don't want to have these meetings. I don't want to have these meetings. So that's kind of a big disappointment for me.
Yeah, and I would agree that is one of the hardest things for any physician leader, an associate CMO, vice president of medical affairs, medical director of the hospital is right. And for those who don't know, we're talking about the HCAHPS metrics that we follow, and there's value and reasons, and then there's the critics and skeptics about it, but it is what it is, and this is the reality we live in. And there are 3 questions that our patients are asked relative to the experience they have with physicians. Really a binary answer, yeah, always, or no, never. I mean, I'm just making it simple for our listeners. And I don't know why physicians wouldn't want those to always be yes, always. And it is a mystery, because when we start out as medical students, we're all about, trying to do the right thing and the best thing. And somewhere along the way, these things get put on the shelf. It doesn't seem to be a priority. And maybe one of the things we can do as leaders is to remind people about the joy and the benefits of taking care of other people. And there's a value to what
there
we do.
is value. And, I always tell people studies have shown better patient experience yields better clinical outcomes. So if you think it's hocus pocus, use it as one of the tools in your toolbox to give your patients better outcomes.
Yeah. And I love the critics out there who say, those studies are not great studies. Okay, so what? They're crap studies. It still makes a difference. So even if we stop arguing about the science of it, who as a patient doesn't want their doctor to sit down with them, talk to them like a human being, explain things in a way that they can? I mean, who doesn't want that? Common sense, regardless of a clinical study. What was the biggest fire that you have had to fight in any of your roles, and hopefully you were able to put out?
I think one of the biggest fires is just a pattern of fires. We're all still very short-staffed. I don't know any CMO who doesn't deal with a lot of holds and a lot of borders in their ED. It's not as bad as it was during the pandemic, but that's how you learn. I'm not an ED physician. I learned about ED throughput by literally running down to the ED, telling my assistant, can we block off these next 3 hours? We'll have to reschedule these meetings, right? And then also having sensitivity, right? When you come back from the ED and you see another doctor you're supposed to have a meeting with because they wanted some career counseling, you say, we had a lot of borders, a lot of holes in the ED. I had to run down there. I didn't forget about you, but we're going to reschedule. I'm anxious to talk to you, rather than just say hi. It's like, okay, I wasn't a priority for this guy. So kind of being aware of all the people around you as you lean into those fires and put those fires out.
So you can't run the entire shop, and you've got to go down to where the people are, listen to what their problems are, and then help them work through that. And that spreading of responsibility and delegation is a key leadership tool. And then, again, we've mentioned it a couple times. Sometimes there are priorities that conflict with other priorities. So you have one individual who is seeking your time and attention, but there are a bunch of patients downstairs, and there are a bunch of people taking care of those patients, and it's totally constipated, and you have got to uncork that somehow. And that priority becomes your priority, and the other person has to recognize that, and juggling all of those competing priorities. In fact, we have a segment in our Chief Medical Officer Academy about competing priorities, and that is a skill that is learned. Again, OTJ, run down to the ED, cancel your day, and hang out there. And there is nothing better than hanging out with the team. I used to go into the OR, used to go into the GI lab. You just hang out with people, and you will learn so much more than reading in a textbook.
Absolutely. And the thing is, we all went to med school. We theoretically all did an internship, and it's kind of fun. Even though I don't deal with congestive heart failure and community-acquired pneumonia, it's fun to go down there and say, well, is this patient stable enough now? They're not septic. I don't see any CHF on the chest X-ray. Can they go back to their extended facility, right? Their extended living facility. So it's kind of fun. It kind of brings you back to your roots, right?
I would agree. I mean, there are certain things about my internship that I don't want to repeat, but there is a beauty in learning again, all over again.
Amen.
All these things that when the very first time you took care of pneumonia, how interesting that was if you're wired that way. First time you ever.
I'm with you, and it's fun.
Yeah.
I sometimes I ask people, did those cultures come back positive or negative, right? I find myself being an intern again. So it brings you back to your roots, right?
Yeah. And the trauma. No, just kidding.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the hardest aspect for you personally, as a human being, as a dude, of being in this job and having this role? What's the hardest thing?
I think it's the biggest challenge is not having full control over your schedule. Like I can even show you, here's my schedule for the day. I can almost guarantee at the end of the day, this is not what's going to play out. There's going to be things added on, things.
See, now I'm having PTSD because that's what my calendar used to look like and more.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, that's the challenge, not having control of your time. And how do you combat that? It's by being resilient, right? As you know, this is a 24-hour day job, right? If your CMO is not available at 9 o'clock, there's a problem, right? If the ED is filling up at 9 o'clock, you got to be willing to field a call or a text from the medical director of the ED, right? What resources do you have for me? Or at least know tomorrow morning, remind the hospital medicine team, we got to get a lot of discharges in there. And then you have a family, theoretically. So 9:30 at night, if I'm texting, my wife will say, I thought we were watching this movie. Who are you texting, right? And the response is to give your wife the same respect that you would give your colleague and say, I didn't forget about you. You are a priority, but we've had these issues in the ED. I could be like, I'm a CMO. Why are you even asking me this question? The response is, I got a call from the hospital. I really want to watch this. Can we pause this for 2 seconds? But I really want to see this movie with you.
Yeah.
And even that approach makes a huge difference. Because if I'm texting, hold on. Yeah, just hold on. Just pause the movie. That's not a recipe for success.
We should make a movie about CMOs trying to watch movies because it wouldn't go well.
It doesn't go well. That's right.
Yeah, that's the number one thing as I've traveled the country the last 2 to 3 years, calendar management, personal time management. So you're not alone in that. That is a real challenge. That the way the structures are for most systems is you don't have a lot of backup. It's hard to get that support. And yeah, whether it's 9:30 at night or 6 in the morning, someone wants something from you, and it can have an impact. So you are not alone in that. Globally, what sort of on the bigger horizon, what do you think is the biggest fire in healthcare, in your opinion, right now, and particularly one that a chief medical officer can intervene upon? What might that fire be, and what can a chief medical officer do about that, if anything at all?
Lee, I'd love to tell you that the era of consolidation is over, that we have a new steady state, a new plateau, but, inflation continues to be a problem. Medicare is not going to be keeping up with inflation in their payments. I think that's a known fact. I think that's going to push more hospitals and more systems. I think we're going to start to see mega big systems become super mega big systems and try to develop those economies of scale. So I think the biggest impending fire is really the corporatization of medicine. And how do we remind and support our doctors in being professionals like accountants and lawyers and business people without making them feel that they are cogs in a wheel, pushing something forward. I think that's the biggest threat for us on the horizon.
Any thoughts on how a chief medical officer can have a role in that looming fire?
I think the best way to handle that is by working with your docs and finding out what makes them tick, right? Does being busy make you tick? Does wanting to become a physician leader make you tick? Does wanting a role in medical staff make you tick? And supporting them in getting there, right? Supporting your medical staff in getting where they want to be so they don't become, cogs in a wheel for a big, large health system. And being able to retain their culture. Like in our market, we have 4 hospitals. We have a market culture, but each hospital kind of does things a little bit their own way. To the extent that it doesn't disrupt the market or the health system, that's okay. Because my family has a culture, your family has a culture. We kind of live very similarly, right? You provide food for your family, you have a car, but you do things a little differently than we do, and that's okay. I don't want to impose my culture on you, and I'd ask you not to do that to me.
Man, you are really insightful, and you're the first that has mentioned the corporatization of medicine as being a big fire that we are facing. And I wholeheartedly agree with you about local culture. And it was Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House back in the day, who said, or at least it's attributed to him, all politics are local. And other people, including myself, have gone on record as saying all healthcare is local.
Yep.
And so we can go back to SUMA, for example. SUMA is acquired by folks from the Rocky Mountains and ultimately the California region, and they have expert advisors from Philadelphia and from Chicago. But the question is, what is the culture of SUMA, and how do we not disrupt that and provide for the people who live in Bookdale, Ohio, or Medina, Ohio? Like, how do you prepare this group to do that while the larger infrastructure is coming to provide new thoughts or new ways to do it? And I think that's an administrative challenge. And I look forward to seeing people work through and solve and not lay a California culture on Fairlawn, Ohio, or Boardman. That just won't work. But there may be some things that would benefit, my old neighbors and high school buddies. So there's something to be said there. As far as the corporatization itself, the analogy that I've written about, and it may have some value, and I'll share this. This is the only advice I'll share with you. In the professional sports arena, we've seen some incredible results when former players become coaches and general managers and ultimately owners. The Pat Rileys of the world, and he's still involved with the Miami Heat. And he was a player, and then he was a coach, and now he has an administrative role. And Steve Kerr for the Golden State Warriors, same thing. He was a player, he's a coach, and he still has a long career in front of him. What I'm getting at is this is where chief medical officers can continue to ascend and have a real role, not in the corporatization of medicine, but the marriage of medicine and corporate thinking. We've had a divorce, and that needs to be repaired. Doctors should own the house of medicine and run the house of medicine and have expert partners in the other things that we don't know and didn't have the opportunity to learn about. But right now it's, we're a little bit living in the basement. Sometimes we're on the first floor and these guys are up in the penthouse, and how do we get up there? And the Steward healthcare system is a horrible story, because that was a physician who was at the top rung, and people who he surrounded himself with, either he didn't listen to them or he listened too much to them, but I don't know you and I were not in that room. So that's an example of where things went wrong. But there are many, many, many examples of where it can go right. So, great thoughts on that. Any other comments you want to make about this corporatization?
I think if we just remember why we went into medicine and remember what our dream was the day we applied to med school and what we wanted to accomplish, kind of, that essay when you applied to med school, I carry mine with me, right? And if I look back on it, I've accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish. It was my roadmap. But if you hold on to that essay, all that other stuff, all the other corporate stuff is just background noise. If you take care of yourself, your well-being, and your patients primarily, you will be able to succeed in the house of medicine.
That's fantastic. Listen, we're basically getting to the end of this episode, but I want your thoughts on the closing thoughts on this. Being a chief medical officer, it is no small task, and you have eloquently stated that case. It takes a lot of preparation. It's intentional, a lot of OTJ, and a big trial by fire in many cases. And my old boss told me that it's just like a career in firefighting. You start out going to firefighting school, you train, you drill, you put on the uniform, and you start out as a fireman. And then one day, somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, "We'd like you to be the squad leader or the captain of the house." And then perhaps someone asks you, or you intend to become the fire chief. But my boss always told me, you cannot be a fire chief without first becoming a firefighter. And I want to know whether you agree with that or not.
I agree entirely. And one piece of wisdom I would try to impart, I still practice clinically 1 day a week, and it keeps me balanced. It reminds me of why I went to medical school. And I don't even share with my patients that I'm the CMO. I say I'm your radiation oncologist, and I love that. And it makes me appreciate the other 4 days that I'm working, or the other 3.5 days that I'm working. But it is so important. When I get frustrated, I'm trying to pull up Epic. Why is my screen not coming up? And I want to curse at the screen. My partner next door is like, okay, he's human. He gets it. He gets it. He's not saying, well, make it work. This is our EMR. And then I'm knocking on his door saying, are you able to pull up our patients on Epic? No, it's been down for 20 minutes, right? But it fosters camaraderie and mutual respect, and it gives you credibility in your role.
Well, you've been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the CMO. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a Chief Medical Officer? Want to be on the show? Email me at leescheinbart@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can listen to this podcast on Apple and also watch the videos of the shows on YouTube. The show's website is thefirechief.podbean.com. I love talking with CMOs from all over the United States, so feel free to connect with me. Please leave reviews and your comments, and please share this with your colleagues. And in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.